We asked for a government minister to join us to talk about all the many questions about housing we've raised over the last week, but no one, surprisingly, was available. I'm joined now by Will Self, Booker shortlisted author of Umbrella and Professor of Contemporary Thought at Brunel University, who has a keen interest in housing, and you've been applying some of that thought to what's going on. What's your analysis? Is this deliberate?
I think that there will be deliberate lobbying going on at a very, very high level. But of course, nobody's able to say...
Lobbying not to build or lobbying to build?
Well, I suspect both, interestingly. But I think it'd be very difficult for large-scale property developers to actually say to people, to politicians, we'd be obliged if you didn't do anything to facilitate, undermining the value of either our land or our existing building stock.
But you also have something quite fierce to say to people who do have a house and indeed are watching it really rise in value.
Well, I think you've got... The whole picture is really, since the post-war period, our idea of what public housing was in this country was formed in two sections. First of all, you have the Attlee government after the war, and under Bevan you had the idea that social housing was an aspirational thing. And in fact, if you go right back to the 1890s, the idea was that by giving people who were less well off better places to live, it would shift them up. After the Tories come to power in the early 1950s, that philosophy starts to change, and really the demonisation of social housing, even though, to be fair to those governments, Tory governments, they built an awful lot of units, they were, on the whole, substandard compared to the units that were built after the war. Then you have Thatcher arrive, and you have a complete abandonment of the idea that social housing provision is something we should care about.
But on the other hand, surely the facilitation of the opportunity to people who could never have dreamt of owning their own house, actually doing so.
Yes, but this is a very, very precise political idea. It's not, it feeds almost all the way back to kind of Mr. Wemmick in Charles Dickens, who had a little kind of castle in the suburbs with a cannon on the battlements. The idea that every English woman or man should have, or British woman or man should be entitled to own their own property is actually a kind of, I mean, it sounds like, I'm not being flippant here, it's a kind of heritage industry idea that has come in. Traditionally, we've rented a lot. Traditionally, we've lived in social housing.
But you're saying this heritage cottage industry, if you like, is in some way actually germane to depriving people of proper rented housing?
Absolutely. It's absolutely what's connected to it. And we saw on your very good report from Oldham, foreign capital coming in now to a market that is highly volatile. And if anybody thinks that the asset bubble that was implicit in the 2007-8 crash has gone away, it certainly hasn't. It's been pushed underground. So now we have a big tranches of foreign capital coming in. Really, there's no let or hindrance to that process, which can only inflate the asset bubble more.
And no obvious solution either, in the sense that if you haven't got municipal authorities that build houses, which has, after all, always been the driver of mass housing provision,
absolutely,
then
absolutely.
There is no immediate fast action cure, and nobody wants it because, of course, it's going to cheapen the price of houses.
The psychological impact of people sitting on a property that has tripled or quadrupled in value, despite the recent financial crisis over the last 20 years, say, is enormous. And frankly, whatever your political stripe, that's what Mrs. Thatcher had in mind when she instituted the policy of right to buy for council tenants in the late 1970s.
So briefly, your thinking doesn't see any rising sun on house building?
To be blunt, the people that you were interviewing there, particularly the man up in Oldham who said he had no ethical qualms about letting to let, he is a rackman. It's quite simply that. The idea that he is...
Well, you might say that, we wouldn't, obviously.
Well, I don't think that that's an actionable term to use. I don't see any great change in the situation until, on the one hand, there is a reinvigoration of the municipal ethos, and on the other hand, there is a willingness not to just treat your property as a cash cow by the property owning class.
Will Self, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Krishnan.